Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. This is part of my awesome 29 Days of Magic series where I interview a Black woman a day for Black History Month. I am so delighted to have Latoya Jordan, who's the founder of Lead by Design Lab, on today's show to talk about her story, her journey, what she's up to. It's going to be a great conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Latoya.
Hey, Laura, how are you?
Oh, just causing trouble, interviewing people like a mad woman.
I love it.
It's fun.
Good.
So the way that this works is the first question is always the same, and I always fast my answers, and I'm sure you'll have a great one. Latoya, what was your first job?
Oh, my very first job was working.
Whatever you want.
Okay, sure. So I'll just the fun part is my very first job was at Busch Gardens working in games. So I always think about that as it relates to it introduced me to working with people and having to develop a level of customer service and customer experience at the early age of 16. So I think that kind of like sparked something in me. And then as a professional, my very first job was I was an academic advisor for student athletes at Marquette University. So that kind of shifted into not only customer service, but really developing people. And that's been kind of my common thread throughout my whole entire career.
See, this is why I asked this question, because it's always fascinating when people tell me what their first job is and how it, in some way, shape, or form, correlates to the work they're doing right now.
Oh yeah,
it's so fascinating that ends up happening. Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's hear this career journey for you. So like starting out there to where you are today, what's that journey been like for you?
It's been windy, right? I think when we start out, particularly when you go to college and then go to grad school, whatever, you think there's just going to be this lockstep progression that you hear of and fantasize about. But for me, it started at working in university life with students, as I mentioned. And then as I started to want to develop myself as the employee, I realized that wasn't happening naturally. There were no programs at universities to grow as a leader. In order to grow as a leader, when you work in universities, you actually have to move typically from state to state, university to university. And I didn't want to do that. So I started to do some research and stumbled across this field called organizational psychology and got really into it. So I went back to school and got a PhD in organizational psychology. And then that took me the corporate route. So my next set of jobs was in employee development, first at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals in New York City, and then at JetBlue. Where I spent much of my career as an executive in HR, where I focused on developing the employees, focused on figuring out were people in the right seat on the bus? How did we need to move them to get optimum performance and optimal engagement? Where did inclusion fit into that bus map? And I spent quite a few years there building out different strategies and programs for the company. And then I think that actually I realized, right? So, but now today, for me, what happened was I loved it so much, but I knew that as I was building my family, that I wanted a different lifestyle. And so I took the same exact skills and experiences I was doing for companies and decided to create a practice of my own. And so I now support organizations that are looking to build human capital strategy for their companies, or they want someone to audit it to make sure that it aligns to their mission, or where there might have some challenges. So I do that now for a diverse group of companies. And I also spend quite a bit of time doing executive coaching for leaders who are just really trying to figure out what their sweet spot relative to their unique leadership style is and how they can leverage that on their teams. So that's kind of the windy road that started with working with student athletes, traveling with the basketball team to NCAA conferences, all the way to today, where now I support senior leaders as they look for ways to hit the goal, if you will.
It's so fascinating, and that's the thing I love about doing this, because it's like you just find really amazing people who are just like, oh, by the way, I've done this, and this, and now I'm here. I'm like, what? How? Obviously working in a company like JetBlue, which is, one of my favorite airlines.
Yay.
What was that like in terms of sort of helping develop people within an organization like that, whereby, obviously you have probably a whole lot of different fiefdoms you have to work with?
Hmm. You know what? I think I was really fortunate to work for a company like JetBlue because they were a values-based company. And so when you have that, it's easy to bring in the values as we try to build out a strategy, right? If your value is bringing humanity back to airline, and you know that your people are who is fueling that, then it was a no-brainer that they would want me to develop strategies that would support those people. Right now, to be fair, there would be some challenges with it, whether or not it's budget or priorities. Right, if we're focused on training some new approach to the baggage process or the in-flight experience, it may be like, okay, so what's that priority relative to Latoya wanting to roll out this type of program? So there'd be some prioritization that need to happen. But I'll be honest, with a company that's values based like JetBlue is, it was never really a question of should we do it. It was more of the question of when should we do it, from a timing perspective and then also from a budget perspective. So it was actually, I will say, it was the best place to cut my teeth and to really get executive experience, because I never found myself having to beg, to
Wow.
have a seat at the table. It was more like, okay, I know we want to push out X many new fleet, next year, but can we also squeeze in? It would be more of that. Like, Latoya, we know it's important. We want to do it. We just got to find the right time. We got to find, that sweet spot when the crew is available to do that training, or when we're available to do a whole new process around performance management or whatever. That really was more of the scuffles that I had internally.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's kind of like the dream job where you're actually in a place where you can actually not only thrive and help everybody else thrive. And so,
Mhm.
what made you decide to become an executive coach? I know a lot of folks out there see that coaching isn't necessary. I firmly advocate for all the time for everyone I know in business, no matter
Mhm.
what level you're at. Like, what made you decide that like now would be a good time to like kind of go out and help executives sort of find their path?
Well, you know what, Laura, man, there are just so many things that kind of collided at once. I was doing internal coaching for the company. They sent me out to get trained because they wanted me to support people who moved from that management level to the executive level. And that is a cliff, right? It may not always feel that way, or you use like, oh, you're a manager, now you're a director, or you're a VP or whatever. People don't see the space between the two, but there is a great deal of space between the two. So I was often matched with or asked to support someone as they made that big transition. And I did that for quite a few years internally. What made me go out on my own was that, one, again, as I was mentioning, I had a different goal for myself personally relative to the type of mom I wanted to be. At the time, I had a infant son, and then we were pregnant with our second, and I just knew that I couldn't manage being the type of executive that I was for JetBlue and have two children under two. That just wasn't going to work. So I needed to figure out a different approach to still do what I was passionate in relative to my profession, but also be the type of mama that I always wanted to be. So that was what brought me out of the company. I would have loved to have stayed there, but that was a necessity for my own schedule. But relative to executive coaching in particular, I'll be honest, I was coaching my friends and colleagues outside of work all
You're
the
like, I should get
time.
paid for this.
Right. I was like, no, wait, what now? I remember having a really, really good girlfriend who is an amazing professional organizer, and her organization was scaling so fast, and she kept hiring people, and she was like, Latoya, I'm bringing these people on, but everyone still wants me to do the organizing. And I was like, well, let's talk about it. So we would go to lunch, and she was like, oh my gosh, you've become my coach, because I was helping her think about, well, how are you bringing these people on? Do you have standard operating practices for how they organize? How can you be in the house organizing when you're physically not there? How do you train them? How do you get them engaged and excited to do it the way you did it? And she was like, "Oh, that's a thing." I was like, "Oh, girl." And what I realized is that everyone doesn't everyone doesn't go through kind of the university of corporate world or whatever to
Right.
learn these things, and that I had a unique set of experiences that I could support others as they gained. And so that excited me to work with entrepreneurs initially. to support them. But then as I was looking around, Laura, I was like, oh, wait, there are executives in corporate that don't have coaches that need them. And they wait until it's dire before they get them. And so I'm like, no, 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 don't wait until you're almost out the door when they're giving you a performance plan before you raise your hand and say, oh, I need some support. Be more proactive. Look for how you might use your unique leadership style to support your team in your own way. Leadership is not monolithic. So how can I help you see that, yes, you can be your style and still lead your team effectively? And as I was having these conversations on LinkedIn and with my colleagues after I left, they was like, oh shoot, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about that. And that just blossomed into having a practice that now people come to me when they say, hey, I don't really want to assimilate to a perceived approach to leadership. Can you help me, harness my own style to do it in my way? And I love that. That's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning, is tackling those types of things.
Fantastic. And I think this is a thing, and I think especially as Black women in business, we don't hit a glass ceiling, we hit a concrete one. And then it's like, what do we do next? So it would be great to get some like your kind of best tips for folks when, either they want to make the move or they want to stay and kind of elevate.
I would say, regardless of if you want to stay and elevate or if you want to do something different outside of your current role, I think the most important thing you need to do is network. Network internally, network externally. You need to be a known entity. Remember, when I was at JetBlue, part of my role, a huge part of my role, was around talent movement, whether or not it was succession planning for the C-suite, or if it was just the other levels of the organization. And a lot of that was from conversations of, oh, I know Laura, she did a great job on this project. Or, I enjoy picking her brain about something. People talk, right? Like that is just the nature of that's human nature. And so being someone that it positively is on the tip of people's tongue is a great thing to do internally. And guess what? It also plays well externally because they have a network external that they also are speaking highly of Laura about. So to me, having a brand, whether it's internal or external, I think is key to helping you to make any type of professional move that you may want to make. And I will say in particular for people of color, Black women, we are so focused on just doing our best, right? We were raised to understand that we have to work X times harder to get X or whatever, that we are heads down in our performance. And that's amazing. We're doing great work. But here's the thing. When we look up, we realize that we've not built that network. We don't have those relationships. We've not identified mentors. We've not done the political things, the things that give us political capital. We've not done. We might be beast at our work, but guess what? No one sees it. No one knows it because they don't know us, right? And so it's so important that we do both, that we do the work, that's the what, and then how we do the work is in a way that people see us, people are interested in learning more, people are engaged with us. Those are the things that I think we miss often when we're just heads down, trying to achieve, trying to do all the things both at work and at home. We miss that part of the ladder, the movement that's really necessary.
If I could, I'd be standing up and applauding you at the moment for saying the things that I have been saying forever.
Yeah.
It's funny. I saw on Instagram a meme the other day, and I was just like, "This is it." And it was basically the girl was saying, like, you're mad about that guy because he got a promotion over you, but here's why he got the promotion. While you were busy putting out the fires, he was actually developing a plan to avoid the fire hazards and then telling everybody about it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why he got the job.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's just something we're so hard done. And I'm like, and I just like, the fire hazards versus fire drills. And by telling people about the fire hazards that could happen versus putting out the fire at that moment, the difference is Someone's a boss and someone's an executor.
Facts. That is it. It's strategy versus implementation, right? And so if you are trying to elevate, you're trying to move more into a strategic role and focus on strategy. That's different. That is different than implementation. It requires a different skill set. It requires a different type of mindset that you have to bring. And I think often we miss that part. We miss that that is a key differentiator. So we get caught up in, well, but I'm busy, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Well, how are you using your time? How are you being really smart about your time? I remember, Laura, when I first got my director role, I would go at least 3 times a week and spend 15 minutes with the new leader. And I called it an ice cream break because we at the time had an ice cream shop in our building. And I would say, hey, do you want to go? I just want 15 minutes just to introduce myself, get to know what your work is, and see how we can partner. When I tell you that helped me so much, because people were like, oh, that's different. And everybody got 15 minutes, right? And it led me to getting to know people. And honestly, particularly in the airline industry, it helped me to get to know the business, because I didn't know all these different aspects of airline fleet. What is that? I know fuel prices, the most expensive part of our budget. Help me understand how all of this plays out from a political perspective. Like, I was asking questions. I would have 1 or 2 questions, and that would be it, along with our little, kiki while we eat ice cream. And that would be it. But they would remember me. So now when they saw me at an executive meeting, hey, Latoya, how's it going? Come sit next to me. Yeah. That is how I'm using my time wisely, versus taking those same 15 minutes and doing something that might have been a more implementation type of task, but I would have never got to meet so many executives in the time that I was able to do that.
And I think that's the key. It's like how you use your time. So it's interesting. So like, what would you say now? Because obviously we can't have the ice cream social anymore because we're all working at home.
Yeah.
So what's sort of the virtual equivalent of the ice cream social to help folks, get to meet those senior leaders for that and have a little quick kind of kikis?
Yeah, right. It's obviously harder. I think what I've seen work is just trying to get that same 15 minutes, but virtually. What I did recently was and obviously you can do it from the cost perspective that fits for you. But I sent someone, I was like, hey, I'd love to meet over coffee. And I sent them a Starbucks gift card, like e-card. Now, did they use that e-card for the meeting? No, right? They had their own coffee from their house. But it was more of the gesture of like, hey, here's $10, get at Starbucks, let's talk for 15 minutes. And they thought it was like, oh, wow, that was really thoughtful. And it made them remember me and be interested in chatting. And then the cool thing about Zoom is it lasted longer because we got engaged, we laughed, we talked, they showed me some stuff that was in their home. And I think one of my kids came in, so they were talking about her. It ended up being a lot more intimate, I'll be honest, than it was at work, where you're still surrounded by all of the cues that you're at work. So I would say still try to get time, look for creative ways to engage them. Obviously, I'm not suggesting to everybody you spend a whole lot of money on Starbucks cards, but just try to find what is that unique thing that you can bring that says, hey, I'd love for us to chat, have a quick coffee chat. And it can even be something this simple, Laura, like bring your favorite mug and your favorite coffee and let's chat for 15 minutes. And for the first 5, we're going to talk about the beans, right? Like it just be anything that just be a little different, I guess is my point. Because everyone's meeting, calendars are inundated right now. How can you bring some lightness, some fun aspect to a quick intro meeting, or a quick get to know you, I got 1 or 2 questions about what the heck is fuel kind of meeting?
Fantastic. I love that. I think I'm going to steal that.
Guys, let me know how it goes if you do.
I haven't thought about the Starbucks thing. I mean, my thing has always been like, do something where it's like, what's on your desk? And so folks will end up showing all kinds of weird stuff, and it's always hilarious. And I usually have I have a candle on my desk that basically says it's from the 125 collection. It's from one of the women from last year's 29 Days of Magic. I highly recommend her candles. She's I think New York based as well.
Okay.
And it's basically, it says I be in my feelings. Sometimes I forget who the fuck I am, and I'm like, and I,
Hey.
and it's really important sometimes because we all forget like who the
I
fuck you
love
are.
that. Okay. I need that on my
I
desk. I
love
love
it.
it.
And
Yeah.
it is on my desk, and so I did it the other day, and someone was like, and they were like, oh. If I didn't know who you were before, Laura, I know who you are right now.
I know that's
Like
right.
exactly.
I love it.
And so it was really good. It's a great little icebreaker. So I love the Starbucks idea. I think that's a great one. So looking back on all the stuff that you've done, what's the one thing you tell your 25-year-old self?
Mm. I would tell her to say yes even when you're afraid. Because I think particularly when I was that age, I just was in my mentality of lockstep. And so everything had to be about progression. Everything had to be, in a sense of order. And I probably said no to a couple of assignments. Not probably, I know I did when I was at Pfizer. I said no to a couple of opportunities because it wasn't lockstep. And I just thought, oh no, the next role for me is a senior manager. And then like I had that in my head. And it
Plan.
wasn't until I got the offer at JetBlue, and the offer was actually a downgrade. And at first I was like, well, now what now? I just finished off a PhD. I know you didn't. But one of my mentors really had to shove me out of the door and say, this is a good role for you. And then the recruiter kind of spoke to me about why say yes. And I did. And Laura, everything was what they said. Within 11 months, I was promoted. Within 2 years, I was a director. And they were like, that kind of ascension doesn't normally happen, right? It normally takes years and years. But because I was ready, I just needed to get in the organization. So saying yes to just getting in, building my network, learning the business from the ground up, it was still a great role. I came in as a facilitator, a leadership facilitator. How ironic. And got to meet a lot of senior leaders that way. And then because I did have the skills, I was able to ascend. So at 25, I would have said, heck no, I'm not taking a lower level role. Are you kidding me? But I would tell myself now, you better take it because it's going to move you faster than you can even imagine. And sometimes you have to step down to go up. And so I think that's something that we're not taught that, right? And so we miss opportunities because we have a perspective or a perception of how we think we're supposed to move.
So you're my new best friend.
Well, then we want to get some coffee after.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you're still in New York, totally. Because you're just speaking my language in terms of like the things I yell from the rooftops about, like why connections matter, why not everything has to be perfect sunshine lollipops right today, and also to be in the room and to make the friends, and oftentimes it comes from me and they're like, well, Laura, you're Laura, and I'm like, yeah, but it took 14 years for me to become the person that you think knows everything and has all these connections. It takes time. It does not, you don't wake up this way. But if I can help you shorten that period and avoid some of the foolishness and the hard it just I want better for my younger generation.
That's right.
All the difficult things that I had to go through to get to where I am now, where I'm at a really good place. If I can help you shortcut that, listen to me. So when I tell you, go to the events, make the friends. I don't care if they're all white women. Go make friends with all the white ladies. Go do it.
Okay, run, don't walk. Because they have insights that you don't have. And the other thing, Laura, was thinking recently, the other thing that they have is they grew up at a dinner table where people had these experiences. So they were from early age listening to strategy, listening to political conversations about the workplace in a way that we weren't, perhaps, right? At least let me say it this way. I wasn't, because my parents didn't have a corporate experience. So these people that you might avoid because they don't look like you or they don't share the same experience, they have insight. They were groomed at those dinner tables, hearing those conversations. And so we want to hear that insight. We want to hear that what do they call it? Insider info. You know what I mean? That we just naturally, perhaps depending on our what our dinner table looked like, wasn't a part of our conversation, wasn't a part of the fodder that we were around. So yeah, go and interact with a whole group of white women, white men, whomever, that can give you insight to help you to understand how to move.
Exactly. And it's not acting white or any other
Oh,
foolishness. It's just
no.
part of the game that we all gotta play.
Oh well.
So obviously you're busy. You've got little ones. Like, what do you do for self-care?
Sleep. Let me tell you something. Sunday afternoons are the times when I have help. I hire a babysitter. My husband does dinner, and I get to take a very long nap. And it just,
Awesome.
that thing, I don't know what it is about Sunday, that 1 to 4 o'clock nap, but it just does something to me for the rest of the week. And so I nap. I also have a Peloton. And so I will get on that thing and jam out to some good quality music, the hip hop jams, or they just did a new one that was a gospel ride. And I'm over here like dancing, praising, and getting my cardio in. So those are the two things. I'm either napping, honey, or I'm on my Peloton, and those things kind of keep me grounded. And not for nothing, these kids having a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old now, self-care sometimes is just watching them and laughing, right? And playing or coloring with them, even though it's obviously mommying, but it's also like just the joy of that is also a bit of self-care
Hmm.
for me.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear that you do take time for Latoya.
Oh yeah.
So last question for you. Do you have a give or an ask of the audience? This can be anything, like a great book recommendation or just something a piece of advice you like to share, whatever.
Yes. So there was a book that I was introduced to when I was at Pfizer. We actually brought in the author, and that was well over 15 years ago at this point, and I still recommend it's one of my top 5 books. And the book is called Expect to Win by Carla Harris. And what I love, this book will be a book for the ages. What I love about it is Carla Harris is a Black woman, one of the few managing partners at Morgan Stanley. And she talks about her ascension in leadership. And in particular, the thing that's always stood out to me was that she talked about how, as a Black woman, how she was moving, how she was being about the performance. They couldn't deny her excellence because she was excellent, but she wasn't doing the other stuff. She wasn't sharing her full self. She had this whole other side of her life that she talks about in the book that I won't give away, that no one knew about. And she said is when she finally opened herself up to sharing a little more, because sometimes as Black women we like to keep it, like we like to
Right.
separate work and work and home, so we don't share all of our fabulousness at work. And she said when she started to open up a little more to her colleagues, that's when they started to feel more like maybe even more psychologically safe to be vulnerable around her, because she was being vulnerable around them. And that reciprocity totally shifted how she was seen as a leader and how she moved at the company. And I'm telling you, when I was in my 20s when I met her, and that changed how I showed up at work. I didn't stay stoic and act like I didn't have a fun life outside. Now I ain't telling all my business either, but I just
Right.
opened up a little bit, and that really helped people to want to get to know me, to trust me, and goes back to what I was saying earlier. And it helped me to build that network. It helped me to get into conversations. So I highly recommend it. Expect to Win by Carla Harris. That book will really set you free as a Black woman.
Awesome. And I will throw that definitely in the show notes so folks can follow and grab a copy of it, as well as get in contact with you, because Latoya, you are amazing.
Oh,
Um,
Lord, thank you.
Thank you so much for being part of 29 Days of Magic. I mean, I could just keep on chatting with you like all afternoon.
Hey, I love
But
it.
no, I mean, just the really wonderful bits of wisdom. Like, this is the reason why I do this campaign every year, because I'm always so delighted by the women who end up falling in my lap and having conversations with. So thank you so much for being part of the show.
You are absolutely welcome. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing something like this to showcase what we're doing out in the world. So I appreciate you so much for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And that is our show.